Have you ever wondered why the most qualified people rarely end up leading countries? Why does it feel like we keep electing leaders who promise everything and deliver nothing? Why do experts get ignored while confident blowhards rise to the top? Here's something that'll blow your mind. In 2005, researchers at Princeton ran an experiment that should terrify anyone who votes. They showed people photographs of political candidates from foreign elections. Just faces, no names, no policies, no context. The participants had never heard of these politicians or their countries. They saw each face for exactly 1 second. Then researchers asked one simple question. Who do you think won the election? The participants guessed correctly about 70% of the time, based purely on facial features. 1 second, judgments about competence based on jaw width and facial symmetry predicted real election outcomes with terrifying accuracy. Then, in 2009, Swiss researchers did something even more disturbing. They ran a similar experiment with children aged 5 to 13. They showed kids pairs of adult faces and asked, "Who would you want as captain of your boat?" They weren't told these were politicians. They didn't know it was an election prediction task. They were just picking faces. The children predicted French parliamentary election winners at rates statistically identical to adults. Let that sink in. We're choosing who controls nuclear weapons, economies, and millions of lives using the same instant facial judgments as a kindergartner deciding which adult looks friendlier. And this isn't some modern problem caused by social media or 24-hour news cycles. A Greek philosopher named Plato watched this exact pattern, charisma triumphing over competence, destroy the world's first democracy over 2,300 years ago. He wrote it all down. He explained exactly how and why democracy would keep rewarding the worst possible leaders. Nobody listened then. Judging by how we still run elections today, nobody's listening now. Plato didn't criticize democracy because he was some elitist snob who hated common people. He lived through the collapse. He watched Athens make catastrophically stupid decision after catastrophically stupid decision because charismatic speakers convinced crowds to vote against their own interests. He watched them execute Socrates, his mentor, a man whose only crime was asking uncomfortable questions, because he made powerful people look foolish. Plato grew up in the shadow of Athens' greatest military disaster, the Sicilian expedition, where over 40,000 Athenian soldiers and allies died in a doomed invasion sold to the public by a charismatic general named Alcibiades, who promised easy conquest and vast riches. The expedition was a catastrophe born from beautiful speeches and wishful thinking. After witnessing democracy fail in the most predictable, avoidable ways, Plato laid out a warning that's been sitting in libraries for 24 centuries while we keep repeating the same mistakes. So let's talk about why democracy keeps handing power to people who excel at winning votes but fail at governing, why our brains are wired to choose the wrong leaders, and why the system itself creates this disaster. Plato told a story that explains everything. Imagine you're about to cross a dangerous ocean. The ship's owner is rich, but knows nothing about sailing. The crew starts arguing about who should captain the vessel. One guy steps forward. He's never navigated before, but he doesn't know enough about navigation to realize he's unqualified. He's confident, not because he's competent, but because he's never encountered the complexity that would make him humble. He tells everyone exactly what they want to hear. The seas will be calm. The journey will be quick. Everyone will get rich. He believes this, not because it's true, but because he genuinely doesn't understand what he doesn't know. Meanwhile, there's an actual experienced navigator standing in the corner. He's trying to explain that storms are coming, the route is dangerous, they need to prepare for difficulties. But he sounds uncertain because he actually understands the complexities. He talks about contingencies, backup plans, things that could go wrong. The crew votes. They choose the confident amateur over the cautious expert because confidence feels better than competence. They mistake certainty for knowledge. They confuse a good speech for good seamanship. The ship sinks. This wasn't a cute metaphor for Plato. This was Athens. The ship was the state. The crew was the voters. And he watched them choose charismatic amateurs over qualified experts again and again until the whole thing collapsed. And we're still doing it. September 1960. the first televised presidential debate in American history. Richard Nixon versus John F. Kennedy. On radio, listeners thought Nixon won, but on television, Kennedy dominated. Why? Nixon looked pale, sweaty, uncomfortable. Kennedy was tan, rested, telegenic. He looked presidential. People who watched on TV overwhelmingly picked Kennedy as the winner of the same debate that radio listeners thought Nixon won. The same words, the same arguments, different medium, different winner. Appearance changed everything. Or take Brexit in 2016. The Leave campaign had 3 words plastered on buses: take back control. The Remain campaign had economists, detailed reports about trade consequences, complex analyses of economic integration. The simple story beat the complicated truth. Voters admitted afterward they didn't fully understand the economic implications. But take back control felt right. This pattern isn't unique to one country or political ideology. From Italy to the Philippines, from the UK to the United States, the same dynamic plays out. Charismatic simplicity beats knowledgeable complexity. Every single time. Here's the question Plato forces us to confront. Why do we treat leading a nation as the one job that requires 0 qualifications? We demand that doctors study for over a decade before touching a patient. We require pilots to log thousands of hours before flying commercial aircraft. We need licenses to cut hair, drive cars, sell real estate. But running a country and making decisions that affect millions of lives? Just be popular enough to win a vote. No experience required, no competency test, no demonstration of actual knowledge. Plato had a name for the people who thrive in democratic systems: sophists. These were masters of persuasion who cared more about winning arguments than finding truth. They could argue any side of any position with equal conviction as long as it got them power, money, or influence. Now here's what made them dangerous. They weren't stupid people. Many were intellectually capable, even brilliant in certain areas. But when it came to governance, understanding economics, ethics, justice, the long-term consequences of policy, they were operating completely outside their expertise. Yet their skill at rhetoric made them appear qualified. They knew how to sound wise without being wise. They knew how to project authority without possessing knowledge. To Plato, this was the most dangerous combination. Intelligence without wisdom, confidence without competence, persuasive skill without genuine expertise. These people didn't know what they didn't know. They'd mastered the appearance of knowledge without acquiring actual understanding. They could convince crowds they understood economics without understanding economics. They could project expertise in governance while being catastrophically ignorant of how states actually function. Think about what this means for democracy. The system doesn't select for people who understand governance. It selects for people who can win popularity contests. And winning a popularity contest requires a completely different skill set than running a country. What skills does a democratic election reward? Public speaking, charisma, the ability to simplify complex issues into memorable slogans, looking good on camera, projecting confidence, making people feel good. These are legitimate skills, just not the ones you need to govern effectively. The skills needed for governing: understanding economic systems, navigating complex foreign policy, managing massive bureaucracies, making difficult trade-offs between competing values, acknowledging uncertainty, accepting that some problems have no good solutions, only less bad ones. Say any of that in a campaign and you lose to someone promising simple fixes. So democracy creates a systematic mismatch. It elevates people who are brilliant at campaigning and often incompetent at governing. Not because they're generally stupid, but because they've spent their lives developing the wrong expertise. Here's what's remarkable. Plato identified the exact same pattern 2,400 years before psychologists gave it a name. Remember the Dunning-Kruger effect? Psychologists David Dunning and Justin Kruger found that people with the least expertise in an area often display the most confidence because they lack the knowledge to recognize how much they don't know. That's exactly what Plato said about sophists. They were confident because they hadn't studied deeply enough to encounter real complexity. An actual philosopher, someone who spent years studying governance, ethics, economics, would be humble because they understood how intricate these systems are. But the sophist, he's never gone deep enough to discover his own ignorance. So he radiates certainty. He has simple answers because he's never understood the complicated questions. And in a democracy, that certainty wins elections. Plato called this the difference between doxa and episteme, opinion versus knowledge. Episteme is hard-won understanding gained through years of rigorous study. It's knowing how systems actually work, recognizing unintended consequences, understanding trade-offs. It's the expertise that makes you competent at governance. Doxa is surface-level thinking, gut feelings, confident assertions based on limited understanding. It's what happens when we confuse our feelings about something with knowledge about something. It's being certain while being wrong. Democracy runs on doxa, not episteme. Elections reward doxa. Campaigns are built on doxa. And doxa always beats episteme because it's easier, faster, and more emotionally satisfying. A candidate with episteme will say, "This problem is complicated. Here are 3 possible approaches, each with significant trade-offs. I'll need to consult experts and adjust based on results." A candidate with doxa will say, "I alone can fix this. The solution is simple. Trust me." Guess who wins? The confident amateur, every time. Not despite lacking expertise, because lacking expertise lets them project simple certainty. And here's where modern psychology explains why this keeps working. Psychologist Daniel Kahneman won the Nobel Prize in economics for discovering that our brains operate on 2 systems. System 1 is fast, automatic, runs on emotion and instinct. System 2 is slow, deliberate, runs on logic and analysis. When we watch political debates or see campaign ads, our System 1 brain does most of the work. We get gut feelings, emotional reactions, instant judgments. System 2 might kick in later to rationalize what System 1 already decided, but the initial choice happens in seconds. The sophists, the confident amateurs, are System 1 experts. They trigger emotional responses, create memorable narratives, project authority. The actual experts try to engage System 2. They want us to think carefully, consider complexity, acknowledge uncertainty. But System 2 is slow, requires effort, and our brains evolved to be energy efficient. Here's another trap, availability bias. Our brains judge the importance of issues based on how easily we can remember examples. 3 news stories about crime make us think crime is our biggest problem, even if crime rates are at historic lows. Sophists exploit this relentlessly. They dominate our attention with specific problems, make those problems feel enormous, then promise simple solutions. Our brains also prefer coherence over accuracy. We favor explanations that sound good and fit together nicely over explanations that are messy but true. A sophist who spins a simple, emotionally satisfying story beats an expert who explains complex causes every time. This is why scapegoating works. Real solutions are usually messy, full of contradictions and uncomfortable trade-offs. But simple villains and simple heroes? That's what our emotional brain craves. Studies analyzing U.S. presidential elections from 1789 to 2008 found that the taller candidate won 58% of the time. When the height difference exceeded 3 inches, the win rate jumped to 67%. Research shows that candidates with deeper voices are rated as stronger leaders. Attractive candidates regularly outperform equally qualified opponents. We're choosing who controls nuclear weapons based partly on jawline, height, and voice pitch. The system is designed to make expertise irrelevant and appearance decisive. Here's the darkest part of Plato's warning. Democracy doesn't just reward the wrong people. It eventually destroys itself because of them. In the Republic, Plato described democracy not as the endpoint of political evolution, but as an unstable stage that collapses under its own contradictions. The pattern: democracy's freedom becomes chaos. Sophists compete by making bigger promises and simpler solutions. Chaos becomes unbearable. People become desperate for order. A strong man emerges, the ultimate sophist, promising to fix everything. The exhausted population willingly hands over power. Democracy dies with applause. Let's look at Rome. By the 1st century BCE, the Roman Republic was collapsing. Political gridlock, violent factionalism, economic inequality spiraling out of control. The Senate couldn't agree on anything. Nothing worked. The people were desperate. Enter Julius Caesar, charismatic general, brilliant military commander, champion of the people against the corrupt Senate elite. Was he stupid? Absolutely not. Was he qualified to govern? In military matters, yes. In understanding republican institutions, economics, long-term political stability, he had no expertise, and more dangerously, he didn't think he needed it. He had confidence and popular support. That was enough. He crossed the Rubicon with his army, an act of treason, and the people cheered. The Senate assassinated him to save the Republic. The people rioted. They didn't want the Republic back. They wanted Caesar. His adopted son Augustus learned the lesson. Keep the appearance of republican institutions while holding all real power. The Senate still met. Elections still happened. Augustus controlled everything, and the Roman people accepted it gratefully because after decades of chaos, at least there was order. The Republic died not with rebellion, but with applause. This pattern has repeated in dozens of countries where exhausted populations traded freedom for the promise of stability. Always with popular support. Always because the system had elevated so many confident amateurs that people couldn't tell the difference between demagoguery and leadership anymore. Why does this keep happening? Because at every stage, democracy's selection process filters for exactly the wrong qualities. Who decides to run for office? Often people who crave power and attention. Who succeeds? Those willing to say whatever it takes to win. Who makes it to the top? People who've mastered persuasion without developing governance expertise. The actual experts can't compete. They won't promise what they can't deliver. They won't pretend to have simple answers. They won't exploit people's fears, so they lose. And the confident amateurs win, until those amateurs destroy the very system that elevated them. So what was Plato's answer? Stop letting people choose who don't understand governance. His ideal system, philosopher kings, sounds elitist because it is. He wanted leaders who'd spent decades studying philosophy, ethics, mathematics, governance. People who understood the difference between knowledge and opinion. People who loved wisdom more than power. And, critically, selected through rigorous testing and education, not popular vote. Before you dismiss this as undemocratic elitism, understand his logic. It's not that most people are stupid, it's that most of us are understandably ignorant about the specifics of governance. And why wouldn't we be? We're busy with our actual jobs and lives. We don't have time to become experts in economics, foreign policy, constitutional law. But democracy asks us to make incredibly complex decisions anyway. It's like asking someone who's never studied medicine to perform surgery. We're not incapable. We're just being asked to do something we're not trained for. And when a system asks people to make decisions without giving them the expertise needed, bad outcomes follow. Plato's solution: let people who've dedicated their lives to understanding governance do the governing. Don't put it to a popular vote among people who haven't studied it. Is that elitist? Yes. Is it also logical? Uncomfortably so. We don't let random people perform surgery just because they have opinions about medicine. Why do we let people choose leaders just because they have opinions about politics? Winston Churchill said, "Democracy is the worst form of government except for all those other forms that have been tried." He's probably right. Every alternative, monarchy, oligarchy, dictatorship, has produced worse outcomes. Democracy has created unprecedented prosperity and peaceful power transfers. But acknowledging democracy is the least bad option doesn't mean we should ignore its systematic failures. Some democracies are experimenting with improvements. Citizens' assemblies where randomly selected people deliberate with expert input. Ranked choice voting to reduce Ireland used citizens' assemblies for constitutional questions. Ancient Athens used random selection for many positions. But these are marginal adjustments to a system whose core flaw runs deeper. We're not victims of democracy's flaws. We're participants. Every time we vote for the candidate who makes us feel good, rather than the one who's demonstrably more qualified, we're feeding the cycle. Every time we share outrage headlines without reading the substance, we're rewarding simplification over truth. The trap is that recognizing these patterns doesn't automatically fix them. Understanding our biases doesn't eliminate them. Knowing how we're being manipulated doesn't stop the manipulation from working. Here's what really makes Plato's critique sting after 24 centuries. We're still doing it. We're still elevating confident amateurs over humble experts, and the system still rewards this mismatch. We get the leaders we choose. Not because we're bad people, but because we're human. Our brains evolved for survival in small tribes, not for evaluating complex policy proposals. Those ancient instincts, trust the confident face, follow the charismatic voice, prefer the simple story, served us well for hundreds of thousands of years. They're catastrophically mismatched to choosing leaders in modern democracies. Plato watched this pattern destroy Athens 24 centuries ago. We're watching similar patterns play out globally. The confident amateurs promising simple solutions, the public's exhaustion with complexity, the willingness to trust charismatic strongmen over cautious experts. The uncomfortable question is whether we're capable of anything different. Can we actually choose episteme over doxa, knowledge over confident ignorance, expertise over charisma? Or are we trapped? A system that makes intelligent people choose poorly because our brains evolved for a completely different world? We are the crew on Plato's ship of fools. The same argument is happening on deck right now. The confident amateurs are promising easy voyages. The experienced navigators are warning of complexity. And we keep choosing the amateurs, not because we're stupid, but because the system makes this choice feel rational. Our brains evolved to trust confidence and fear complexity. The question isn't whether Plato's warning was valid. The evidence overwhelmingly suggests he was right. The question is whether understanding the trap is enough to escape it, or whether these flaws are so deeply embedded in how democracy works that there's no real escape. Maybe democracy's fatal flaw isn't that it gives power to the people. Maybe it's that it gives power to people whose brains are optimized for tribal survival decisions, not complex policy evaluation. We're playing a game our evolutionary hardware wasn't designed for. And the confident amateurs know exactly how to exploit that mismatch. If this challenged how you think about democracy, share it. And tell me in the comments, are we actually capable of choosing knowledge over charisma, expertise over confidence? Or will we keep choosing the confident amateurs until they destroy what they've inherited? Because understanding Plato's warning is one thing. Escaping the trap might be impossible.